Hello everyone, I'm Sylvia from Fairlight Tarot. Welcome to my channel and welcome to my top 10 Goth AF decks AVR to 22 zines. So I saw the original video on 22 zines channel and I will link it in the description box below, by the way, if you want to watch it. And I thought to myself, I really need to do this tag because I used to be a punk. So yes, I was living in the late 90s in London. I was, 20. And I was a punk. I just loved it. And it was a bit of a rebellion because London in those years, it was the heart of Cool Britannia. I don't know if you guys remember that or if you know what that was. And everyone was listening to Oasis. You know, it was either Oasis or Blur. And I was listening to neither. I was going to all these really dark disco and clubs every night, and for each and every night we had a different place to go. And if any of you is from London or has been to London in the 90s, late 90s, you'll remember the Slumlight, you know, the Hellfire, the Marquee. The Astoria was my favorite on Friday nights, and it had 3 floors in which, you know, the lower you got on the floor, the darker the music became. And I saw this video and I thought, well, I need to do this tag. So I had to limit myself to 10 or thereabouts. And let's start with this, which is a not really well-known tarot deck. It's the Tarot of the Unknown Shadows. And this one has been designed by Ivan Murlika, but it's been printed by Dark Geneva. Now, this deck is a collage, a photographic collage kind of deck, as you can tell. These are all vintage photos. And to me, this is really dark because it's got that kind of, you see, every now and then you feel that kind of atmosphere of perhaps of things that have passed. I don't know if does it make any sense? I watched a movie that every time I use this deck, it reminds me of that movie. So the movie is called The Others. I don't know if you watched it. It's with Nicole Kidman, and it's not a new movie. It's from, I reckon it's from about 20 years ago, but it's really, it reminds, I'm not going to spoil it for you because if you haven't watched it, I really do recommend it. It's a horror movie. Okay, it's a high tension, well, look at this card. It's a high tension horror movie. So obviously if you like the genre, you may have probably watched this movie already, but if you haven't, I highly recommend it. It is great. It is a great movie, and every time I watch it, I'm reminded, or every time I use this tarot, I'm reminded of that movie, because if you watch the movie, you will see that there's a very specific part in which they talk about these photographs. It's a very special kind, very special type of photographs, but it's so deliciously dark. Now, disclaimer, you're gonna hear me say the term delicious or deliciously dark a lot of times during this video, because that's what I do. I associate darkness, let's say, darker decks with something that is delicious, which is a bit odd, and I get that, but it's a way to express the way I feel towards goth or dark art, let's say, or artistic representations. I think they're absolutely delicious, and I mean, look at this card. So this was the Tarot of Unknown Shadow by Ivan Murlika. The next deck had to be in this tag because it's called the Gothic Tarot, and this one is illustrated by Joseph Vargo. I use this deck all the time together with my other, let's say, Gothic, sort of Gothic decks, especially the Bohemian Gothic, but we'll see later, and other very similar decks. This deck has got a lot of blue hues, as you can see. It's a mix of dark creatures, dark rituals, as you can see, skeletons, skulls, vampires, zombies, and just incredibly, to me this is so evocative. This death card is probably one of my favorite ones. I mean, when I tend to separate my brighter decks from my darker decks. I don't know if that's something that, you know, you do too, but in my case it's because I don't see the point in using them together. Whenever I feel like I want to use a dark deck, is because I'm in a very specific place. And there's no point in trying to get out of there. I really have to double down on it, and I have to feel all the feels that need to be brought up. And by the way, I was watching a video the other day about someone, I'm sorry, I don't remember because I watch a lot of YouTube videos, but someone was talking about shadow work, and to me shadow work is I probably have a very different definition from anyone else. So to me shadow work is something that is in the shadow, so you have to identify it and then you have to bring it to the light. That's why it's called shadow work to me. But it's not necessarily always something negative. So it's not about recognizing the darker parts of myself and, you know, understanding them, coexisting with them, etc. In some cases, there will be darker parts that are brought up to the light. And in some cases, there will be lighter parts that were hidden in the shadow and they need to be brought to light. So the darker parts that are brought back to light will need to be released, and that's what I will do as a work, as personal kind of self-care practice work. But whenever a brighter part of myself was in the shadow and I succeed in bringing it back to the light, I will need to nurture it. So it's a discovery, it's a self-discovery kind of work. It's not necessarily a work of just only release. But anyway, so I thought I'd just say that because I see there's so many different way of looking at shadow work. And yes, indeed, it is true that I tend to use darker decks to do shadow work, but that's only because their elemental power is acting like some sort of a portal to access my, well, that shouldn't be there, to access my darker, my shadowy parts. So this was indeed the Gothic Tarot illustrated by Joseph Vargo. This deck is the Earth and Bone Oracle and by Syrian Shadow. And let me just spare a couple of words about this deck, because the more I watch walkthroughs of this deck on YouTube, the more I cringe, because so there's a lot of let's say controversy around this deck. There's a lot of negative reviews, and they're mostly concerning the fact that the cards are indeed very dark. Now in camera they actually look much brighter, but I can assure you that for example in real life you cannot see the details of the branches here, you can't see anything here, you can barely see the top of the card here, and it is kind of, it's hard work to try and understand what's in the actual image. So even in here, for example, there's you know, a lot of details here that you completely miss in real life. And so there's so many negative reviews, but let me just tell you this. Okay, yes, it is true, the cards are really dark. Would I love them to be a little bit brighter so I can see the details? Absolutely. Some of the skulls that you see in these cards are the same image and it's repeated throughout the deck. Is that true? Yes. Do I mind it? No. So in my case, when a deck calls me, when I feel good about wanting to use a specific deck, and when using it I have really good vibes out of this deck, I don't mind if there's, you know, defects, flaws in the production, whether they're intentional or not. So this card, for example, is absolutely beautiful on camera because the camera tends to bring up the light grays of this card, but it's very much monotone, it's very much uniform in real life. So it actually looks a lot better on camera. Same goes for this card. Same goes for this card. You can barely tell the shape. But I don't mind, because whenever I use this deck, it does the job. It's just, it is so beautiful, so evocative. Some of the cards are so intensely said. And obviously, of course, I feel called to use this deck in very specific moments of my life. But perhaps that's what I want. Perhaps it's the darkness that I'm seeking out. So I just wanted to say a couple of things about this deck, because I felt really bad whenever I see these videos, which is completely legit, and everyone is entitled to have their own opinions. I'm just telling you, this is mine. This is my opinion. So this is the Earth and Bone Oracle cards by Syrian Shadow. And this next deck, I think I got it something like 4 weeks ago. And I loved it. I absolutely still love it. But I never used it. Not once. And the reason is the size. I think I've shown this deck before. It's unusable. I mean, okay, this is the deck. This is my hand. You see what I mean? It doesn't even fit in my hand. I honestly don't know how to use this deck. I look at it all the time. As you can see, I'm even doing this because I want to keep it in order. It is so gorgeous that I will never rehome it. It's very, very safe in my collection. I mean, some of the cards are just so deep. The artwork is very evocative. Some of the cards really, really nail the darker, the shadowy part, you know, of the, for example, in this case, the Justice card. I would love for it to be on a small, just a smaller, then maybe smaller, so that I can actually use it, because I would love to use it. And believe you me, I actually tried. I even found a way to shuffle it, even though I don't like it, because when I do the wash, some of the cards end up reversed, and I don't necessarily read reversals. By the way, this generally speaking, so this deck is based on a video game, Diablo the Sanctuary, and most of the time you will see that these editions are, the minors are rather pippish. However, I have to be very happy to say that they're not. As you can see, they are absolutely illustrated, and it's actually a very, very good take on the RWS. I love it. I absolutely adore. I mean, look at this card. Yes, there's a lot of gore. Yes, there's a lot of blood. But we're talking about goth decks, okay? We're talking about goth AF decks. So obviously this deck has got his own space in this kind of tags. I love this 401s, by the way. So as I was saying, even when I shuffle it, I end up with reversals. I didn't mind. But the cardstock, I have to be honest, is not the best. It's kind of papery, and it feels like it's the when you do shuffling, you really have the risk of ruining the edges, splitting them apart, and I really don't want to. Because, well, I've seen it in a bookstore. I've actually got it from a bookstore. This was the last copy that I had left. Don't even know if it's in Amazon. It probably is, but I haven't seen it. And I don't want to have to buy it again, because it's not a deck that I use all the time. So I don't want to ruin it and then have to, you know, buy it again for not using it. But this is, oh my goodness, look at this Four of Pentacles. Look at the eyes. I really enjoy looking at it. So perhaps this is the whole thing about this deck. Looking at it. You don't always have to use your decks. Some of them are for collection purposes only. In any case, this is the Diablo the Sanctuary tarot deck. This is the Blood Moon Tarot by Sam Guy, and I have really good news. I read in the creators newsletter that they're going to reprint it, yay! So if you didn't get a copy when it was available, I highly recommend, you know, subscribing to their newsletter and, you know, getting it if you like it when it will be available again. This deck is so beautiful. It's out of this world, I kid you not. I mean, look at the backs. Even the backs are just fantastic. The artwork is spectacular. The colors just make sense. The images are evocative. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of details, which is something that I really like. But it's also a deck that you can get lost in the details sometimes. There are decks like, for example, the Rainbow Star, which I adore, absolutely. But there are so many details, and every single detail is actually speaking about something, right? In this deck, I feel it's not exactly the same. Yes, there's a lot of details in this deck too, but you can also choose to concentrate, to focus on the central figure of the card and just tell a story, start telling a story from that. And you don't necessarily have to look at every single small line that there is. It's so beautiful. As you can see, the colors vary depending on the suit. So we've got the skins, the songs with more like pastel colors. I really enjoy using this deck. So Dreams is air. I'm actually okay for to have a look at this one. Honey is Pentacles or Earth. Because this Ten of Honey, it's just really beautiful. So this is the Blood Moon Tarot by Sam Guy, and as I said before, this is right now out of print, but it will be reprinted. These two decks, I'm going to show them together because they are by the same artist, Alejandro Colucci. It's the Tarot Z. Z stands for zombie, and the Tarot V, where V stands for vampires. The artwork is very similar. It is the same artist, so you would expect that. I first got the Tarot Z. This deck is absolutely gorgeous. And it's one of the decks that I use most of the time during the darker months. The artwork is a digital photography. As you can notice, there's a lot of cards which remind me of movies about zombies. Even The Walking Dead, for example, the TV show. Not necessarily that this is based on that, or you won't necessarily see the same characters portrayed in the cards. But it's definitely got that kind of vibe. I mean, this to me is definitely the Walking Dead, for example, or the movie with Brad Pitt, World War Z. I talked about this deck many times in my channel. It's one of my favorite ones, and the reason behind this is because there is so much dignity in these zombies. It's not one of those decks like one of those movies where zombies are, you know, stupid, or one of those video games where they're easy to kill because they're slow. There is a dignity to them, there is a substance, and it reminds me a lot more, not visually, but it reminds me a lot of the concept of zombies in The Passage. That book, if you haven't read it, it is so touching. And that's a word that I will use for many of these cards. For example, this one, this is the Star card. If you read the guidebook on this deck, both the Tarot Z and Tarot V have excellent guidebooks. And I'll never stop saying that because I've heard several YouTubers saying that they don't read the guidebook of these two decks because they read like RWS, you don't know what you're missing. There is so much depth in the guidebooks. It's a story in itself. And it's a very, very sad story. And it's a very, very emotional one, and a very touching one. So as I was saying, it's, well, this is the Tarot Z. So let's have a look at the Tarot V. It's the kind of world that is, yes, a dystopian world. It's a dystopian future. There's so many, we're so used to this kind of take on the future, aren't we? I mean, this is what we hear practically on a daily basis. We are going to be faced with catastrophe, etc. And we're kind of almost accepting that this is the future we're going to look at. The essence of these decks is not of despair. And I don't know if that makes sense. Because obviously they're supposed to be, you know, a dystopian future, a terrible future, something horrible has happened. And the very few humans that survived certainly don't have an easy life. So how does this not communicate despair to me? I don't know. But somehow it appeals to a part of me that wants to hope. Well, as I said, there are so many cards that remind me of movies. Probably in the Tarot V even more than the Tarot Z. I am not bothered by that at all. I don't mind. If I recognize the movie, fine. If I don't, fine as well. I certainly don't look for it. If it comes to me, then it's okay. There is, I don't know whether it's the fact that all of these vampires, in this case, are looking at you. They're confronting you, but in a way in which their will is to be acknowledged. And that's why it reminds me of the passage, because there's a scene in the passage, and it's so very deep, so very touching, in which all of these vampires or zombies that have become like that, and they used to be human, and they come to the one source of knowledge and ask. They can ask for anything. They can ask for anything they want, and the one thing they ask is, what was my name? Who was I? I cried so much when I read that part in the book, because it gives such a strong portrayal of our society, in which we tend to forget who we are, to the point that you really come to realize that these characters have become vampires or zombies, not necessarily because they have been infected or bitten, but because they have lost their own identities. And deep down in their heart, if they still have one, there is that desire to reconnect, to know who they are or who they were. And the name is the most important thing. This is Interview with the Vampire so much. Anyway, I always get almost teary when I talk about these decks, because I see so much in them. So this is this were the Tarot V and Tarot Z by Alejandro Colucci. And the next deck is one of my favorite. I've shown it so many times in my channel. It's The Murder Occurs by Corrado Roy. Corrado Roy, as I said many times, is my favorite illustrator, graphic novel illustrator. He's an Italian. And he was, or still is, he still does that. He illustrates a few of my favorite comics. My favorite comics are obviously horror comics. So Murder of Crows, obviously you will see a lot of crows. It's a black and white deck, however the tint is towards the cyanotype. I really enjoy the art style of this deck. It's amazing. Some of the cards remind me of paintings from the 20s, the 1920s, for example, this one. It is very dark, very dark, very dark. But at the same time, it is glorious and it's beautiful and it's evocative. I mean, look at the Six of Swords. Most of his work is very consistent, I would say. So if you, for example, have another one of his decks, which is called The Dark Side of Tarot, which unfortunately I don't have, at least not yet, but I will. And or if, for example, if you're in Italy, if you're Italian and you read Dylan Dog, for example, it will be easy for you to recognize his work, because the line traits are very recognizable. As I said, it's very consistent. Reading with this deck is a very enjoyable experience. Something that is dark does not necessarily have to bring on a dark reading, but it is a sharpshooter, that, you know, I can assure. So this is the Murder of Crows Tarot by Corrado Roy. And because of the title, I could not include the Bohemian Gothic Tarot, which is a very, very interesting and cool deck. It's by Baba Studios, by the way. Good news about this one. So this deck is at the moment out of print. However, Baba Studios, if you follow them on Facebook, I think they released a post saying that they are going to reprint not just this one, but also the Bohemian Cats. The title, I think the title is Bohemian Cats. I don't remember exactly because I don't have that deck, but I will definitely buy it when it's reprinted. I love the combination of colors in this deck. There's this general, like 90% of the hues in these cards are towards the blue tones. However, every now and then there are splashes of color. See? And it makes it so interesting to me, and it's a cheeky one at that. I mean, there's a lot of cards in which, you know, there's a sort of an invitation to the, I always pick this card to make this example. So this is the Seven of Wands, and it's the card of, you know, the resilience card of, you know, standing up for what you believe in, but you find yourself, you know, against everyone else because right now you're actually on your own. I believe that this card is incredibly cheeky because the character is breaking the fourth wall, looking directly at you and kind of asking you to look back and asking you to acknowledge what they're doing. There's many cards that use this kind of technique. And they're not just creepy, it's creepy that wants to be funny as well. Or perhaps it's just me, I don't know, but I do find this deck really, really cheeky. I really enjoy using it. I use it very often together with the Gothic Tarot by Joseph Vargo, because the hues, the blues are very similar. And the splashes of colors every now and then are also very similar. There's a lot of references in this deck as well. You can see, for example, Dr. Caligari's Cabinet of Curiosity, which is a very famous German movie from, I believe, the 20s. So a silent movie. Unfortunately, I don't have the large guidebook for this deck, although, you know, if they do reprint it, I'll definitely make sure to buy the larger guidebook, because it's I think it's gonna be very, very interesting. Look at this card, the Seven of Cups. So this is the Bohemian Gothic Tarot, and it's being published by Baba Studios. Last but not least, I had to include this wonderful, gorgeous tarot, which is the Madame Lydia Wilhelmina's Tarot of Monsters, the Macabre, and Autumn Scenes by Betaline Bajema. I've talked a lot about this deck. It's one of my favorites in my entire collection. This deck is just gorgeous. There are no words. It's the collage kind of deck. It's also that kind of creepy, cheeky that I really appreciate. But on a darker shade, I would say, than the Bohemian Gothic. There's a lot of creatures, there's a lot of hybrid, I would say, between a human core and skeletons, or, you know, even animal parts, or you see a lot of plants. Many of these characters have their faces partially or entirely covered. Or there will be some details about them that it's a bit off. For example, this one has a tattoo of a spider on their neck. There's always something in these cards that somehow, I mean, look at the dolls here. Somehow it makes you think, but it's not just provocative, I'd say. It's actually beautiful. It's the kind of, there you go, for example, this card. I mean, it's the devil card, of course, fair enough. Then it had to be something that calls upon your shame, temptation, seduction, etc. But it's not just that. I feel like the vibes on this card are also very strong when it comes to the sense of decay of life. And there's a lot of cards that give me that kind of vibe. There's this decay of the flesh in this particular example. And it's a deck that stops there. So it's not a hug deck at all, as you can imagine. But what I mean with that, it's that it's not even meant to be. It's the deck that takes you to a certain point of, as I said, decay. It takes you to the edge of life, and it does not make any step further. So it doesn't go down the precipice, but it also doesn't take any step back. And I really enjoy this for it. So this is the, well, the name is very long, but almost no one calls it by the full name. And I don't either. I just call it my Lydia Tarot or my Madame Lydia Tarot. And of course, because whenever I have to stick to 10 decks, I just find it impossible to do, and I have to have another deck. So this is an honorable mention, and it's the Southern Gothic Oracle, and the author is Stacey William. And I have good news on this as well. Stacey is actually working on a tarot deck. So she's very famous, this oracle. You've seen it a lot lately. In the last 6 months, let's say. There's also the Southern Botanic Oracle by the same author. As I said, if you follow her on Instagram, you'll see that she's working on a tarot deck with the same thematic. Now, I absolutely adore these decks because I'm in love with the southern states of the United States. I've spent many of my holidays there, just, you know, just renting a car and just driving around. What I really appreciate is that these decks come with an expansion pack each, and this one is, for example, the Haunted expansion pack. And you'll see the difference in the cards is that the card of the standard deck have got a number at the top, and the cards from the expansion pack don't. And the Haunted expansion pack is just absolutely beautiful. So it's referring to legends, haunting legends of states in the southern part of the US. The Mothman, for example. If you ever watched the Mothman Prophecies, it's actually really dark movie. And I just really enjoy using this oracle. There is a small booklet that goes with it, but I feel that because you don't just have the title. So this is a pine cone. Yes, I know. Thank you. It's a pine cone. But I really love the fact that Stacey has actually introduced a couple of keywords. So third eye or new perspective. So it makes you understand that when we're looking at the pine cone, we're probably looking at the same kind of meaning behind the Hanged Man. Or the painter. So I was reading about this. So the painter is actually a panther, and it's but in the southern slang, let's say, that's how they pronounce it, and it comes with the keyword strength and power. The copperhead, the alligator. I really love the artwork. I love the choice of colors. All the cards in the expansion, the Haunted expansion pack, you can actually get a QR code and download a PDF file where it gives you really good explanation about the stories of these characters, as you can imagine. So the Bride of Annandale looks like a ghost, and the keywords are toxic, nostalgia, and infatuation. Or the Bull Hag. etc. I really enjoy this deck. I use it both on its own and many times I'm pairing it with a lot of tarot decks. It's a very good sharpshooter, workable kind of deck. And let's end with the Conjured Spirit with summoning drama and negativity. So thank you so much for watching this video. This was the hashtag GothAF decks, a VR to 22 zines. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. More to come. Have a great day.